There's been a shooting there, ma'am. The victim who has been shot is Melissa Howard.
I went into the front foyer and I turned the light on.
What did you see once there was better light?
My mom lying there.
She was strong. She was just magic. She was magic.
But you're having an affair with this dead woman that you discovered, is that right?
Yes.
Melissa Howard told everyone that if she got killed, that her husband did it.
So you've been to her house before?
Yes.
Oh, he says they got some new DNA technology. They have your DNA in multiple places on her body.
So this is the sweatshirt, and you can see it has quite a bit of blood on it.
I think they thought they had the perfect plan. I think they thought they had the perfect execution.
You're giving me something. I'm not just doing it out of the goodness of my heart. I mean, people that do stuff out of the goodness of the heart don't kill people.
This is what he's going to tell you. How to get out of that situation.
And I grabbed the gun.
Trying to find the first place to put a body.
No, sir. The only thing they could do was kill him.
You want to say anything? We, the jury, and to find the defendant.
Police fire medical. There's been a shooting there, ma'am. Is this Crestview PD? Okay, the victim who has been shot is Melissa Howard.
Melissa Howard, a 33-year-old mother raising 3 children, a registered nurse at the local hospital, Missy to her friends who loved her.
She's absolutely beautiful. Not just in appearance, but her spirit. She was very captivating and funny. She was smart and she was strong and dedicated. She was just magic. She was magic.
And we couldn't get her to answer the door.
Missy's boyfriend, Chris Cadenhead, found the body.
I ran in and she got into the house and Melissa's dead on the living room floor.
Okay, she's unconscious, she's not talking to you, anything?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Okay, is she breathing? Can you get a pulse of any kind?
I haven't even touched her, no ma'am. I didn't want to mess with nothing. She's been murdered.
Her neck was almost severed. The knife blade actually impacted the vertebrae.
The crime scene was so clean and devoid of evidence that they thought maybe it was a professional hit.
But to homicide detective Kenny Pinkard with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, it seemed like a crime of passion.
Anytime you have someone murdered, the first person you're going to look at is their significant other. There's an anger issue there, and normally that's that evil point in somebody's heart when they go from love to hate.
And so the prime suspect for Detective Pinkard was Melissa Howard's ex-husband, Brian Howard.
Melissa Howard told everyone that if she got killed, that her husband did it. They were in a very heated child custody battle for their son Taylor.
A long and bitter custody battle that her lawyer Janice Burke remembers all too well.
She said, "I'm scared to win." And I asked her why. And she said, "Because I believe he will kill me." Every time we talked, every time we met, every time we went to court, she was scared.
But Melissa Howard won her battle in the courts, and her husband was ordered to turn over their son Taylor to his mother.
She said that it was never going to be allowed to happen. She said, it's not going to happen. I won't be alive. She told me that.
In fact, 2 days before the son was to be turned over, one of her husband's friends, Russell Holbrook, showed up late at night with a warning.
And she called me that Wednesday night, and she was scared out of her mind. Very upset. Hysterical to the point where she almost couldn't speak. Because I asked her, I said, "Who was it?" And she said, "David Russell Holbrook." He said to her that she needed to let that boy be with his father. I guess the word would be menacing, because she was a small person. She was petite, and the friend of the former husband, Mr. Holbrook, who came by, he's a large man, and she was there alone. She was afraid. I had suggested that she call law enforcement that evening, but honestly, I didn't follow up to see if she did.
She did not, fearful of doing anything that might jeopardize the court order that would give her custody of her son Taylor in just 2 days.
All the transition of the custody of the child was about to kick in, and all of a sudden she's dead.
I think the husband was the prime suspect from the get-go.
But the forensics team could not find any fingerprints, any DNA at the crime scene to link Brian Howard to the crime.
She had a diary. It was missing, and the newly installed security system had been disabled.
It was getting frustrating because you didn't have any hard evidence. You had a lot of circumstantial information, but no hard evidence.
Detective Pinkard was certain they were missing something, and he focused on the sweatshirt Melissa was wearing when she was killed.
The sweatshirt was saturated with her blood. I knew there was DNA somewhere. There's no way there's no DNA on that body of the killer.
But the lab, with the technology at the time, did not have the ability to separate out any DNA. And not everybody in Crestview, a small town in the northern Florida panhandle, was willing to help the investigation, many saying that they too feared the ex-husband, Brian Howard, and his friends.
And I fear doing this interview, but I have to fight because I promised I'd fight. When I said I was going to do this, people said, please, don't talk about Brian. Don't say anything about Brian. I don't want him to kill you too.
To turn up the heat on Howard, local reporters are being told that an arrest could be imminent.
They weren't mentioning names, but they were doing media releases saying that, arrest is coming, and it's any time now. It could be tomorrow.
But then, a crushing blow to the investigation.
Brian had an ironclad alibi. He was at an Aztecs restaurant, a Mexican restaurant here locally. He was surrounded by his family. After leaving the restaurant, several people came back to his house and were at his home. We got the receipts and everything from the restaurant showing that they were all there. We interviewed everybody.
Howard had even arranged for his ex-wife to drop off their son Taylor so the little boy could also be at the dinner.
She allowed her son to go to that dinner, and then he ended up staying with them that night.
So Taylor was with his father all that night, not at his mother's home when she was murdered. Yet another witness to bolster his father's alibi.
She said it would never be him. She said he will have an airtight alibi.
Well, after that, everything went cold for a long time.
It would take almost 12 years and the arrival on the scene of a new detective with a fresh set of eyes.
Melissa Howard case was a cold case.
The murder of the 33-year-old nurse from Crestview, Florida, had gone unsolved for some 10 years.
Cold cases are just, well, that's it, they're cold.
In those years, Melissa's son Taylor, 10 years old at the time of his mother's murder, had been raised by his father, unaware his father was a prime suspect.
It's a new year, a time when most people are happy and thinking of the future. However, for one family, is yet another reminder of another year without a loved one. Her mother, Janet Gilsdorf, is anxious for the police to find answers in her daughter's murder.
Well, it's sad. There's not a day goes by I don't think about her.
The Florida Department of Law Enforcement even reached out to inmates in the state prison, creating a deck of 52 playing cards of the victims of unsolved murders across the state. Melissa Howard was the 3 of hearts. But still, there were no new leads, and friends and family were losing hope.
When we lost her, all of the children that she loved, even the ones that weren't hers, were devastated, and still are.
But for a certain kind of detective, like Dennis Haley of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, a cold case is the ultimate challenge.
It's like putting a puzzle together. It's like going back and bringing a conclusion to a case and bringing justice to families who felt like maybe law enforcement had forgotten about their loved ones.
Melissa Howard's case files have been gathering dust at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the FDLE.
The case was handed to me, and I didn't have an opportunity to work on it.
Enter a new FDLE agent assigned to the Florida Panhandle area, Megan Palumbo.
When Agent Megan Palumbo came to my office and asked me if she could work a cold case, and I said that I had this case I hadn't had a chance to look at. Would she mind looking at it?
I went back and just looked at initial crime scene photos and really just kind of started looking at what was there that was maybe being overlooked or just needed to be looked at a little bit more thoroughly.
And once again, a focus on Melissa's ex-husband, Brian Howard.
Her ex-husband had been a suspect in the initial investigation. He had an alibi. He was at a restaurant eating with his family, so we had receipts, time-stamped receipts. A lot of eyes were on him that evening.
Agent Palumbo teamed up with a detective from the local Crestview Police Department, Ralph Garrett. He thought the ex-husband's alibi was just too good.
It tells me he covered his tracks very well, and he knew that we weren't going to put him at her house. I believe he thought he got away, but I'm sure that he was always looking over his shoulder.
And Agent Palumbo then did what she says she always does in such cold cases and tried to imagine what happened, how the murder went down.
I believe they came in through the front door. Melissa had put up a fight, and she was across the living room from the front door and laying on her stomach and chest area. There were toys that had been kind of strewn out on the floor. There was picture frames and things that had been knocked off of an end table hutch that's on the end of the couch. And there was a lot of disturbance.
And that picture she created in her mind gave her an idea of what detectives might have missed 10 years earlier.
I think they initially believed maybe she was attacked from the front, right at the door, and I believed, and Dennis believed, that she had been actually attacked from behind, and that's why we had the back of the sweatshirt re-examined.
When a shirt comes in, they take random cuttings, and they may not always get fortunate enough to hit the right place.
So that led them to ask the forensics lab to re-examine Melissa's sweatshirt using new testing techniques.
That was one of the non-affected areas of the sweatshirt where they had tested before, but where we found it at the end was a cleaner portion of the sweatshirt.
2 weeks later, surprising, satisfying news from the state crime lab. A discovery of DNA that was not that of Missy Howard, that was likely the DNA of the killer.
I mean, the turning point in this case was the DNA discovery.
But then the surprise. The DNA was not that of her ex-husband, Brian Howard, and it did not match any DNA in the FDLE crime files. But it was remarkably similar to Howard's best friend, Michael Holbrook, although not an identical match.
It's close, but it's not his.
It was a familial match to Michael's, a paternal or male relative of Michael Holbrook.
Melissa's lawyer had told detectives that Michael's brother, Russell Holbrook, had been the man who had gone to Melissa's home 2 days before she was murdered and delivered a threatening message.
So from that, we wrote a search warrant for the DNA of Russell Holbrook's.
Russell Holbrook had since moved to Alabama, and he was not happy when the Florida detectives showed up at his door.
Investigator Ralph Garrett collected DNA swabs from the inside of his mouth. He didn't have anything to say.
You could see that he was mad or angry. But one of the first things I noticed is it appeared that his heart had moved from his chest up into his throat. You could see it pounding in his throat.
Well, I'm thinking we're talking to a guilty man right now.
You know, sometimes coming from a small town, sometimes your brother from another mother is closer than your brother. You know what I mean?
And that's how the detectives in the Melissa Howard murder case saw the relationship between her ex-husband Brian and the two Holbrook brothers, Michael and Russell.
You got friends that they go out and do some stuff that they shouldn't do, so they got dirt on each other, and they know certain things about each other that you would never do with your family.
They were like a band of brothers. They all had something on one another. She told me that they all had a little dirt on one another.
So now, the detectives waited for the results from the state crime lab. The DNA found on the blood-soaked sweatshirt of Melissa did not match her ex-husband Brian or his friend Michael Holbrook. But would it be a match for Russell Holbrook?
Russell was the only one that refused to give us DNA, and we know now why.
It was a match.
It was excitement. It was the big breakthrough that we needed to move it forward.
That was very important, and that was the key to this whole case.
The theory, the hunch by Detective Megan Palumbo about how Melissa was killed, had paid off.
The fight was on from the door on in. I think Melissa put up a very good fight, and it unfortunately just wasn't enough. And I think they got behind her and had her by the face and stabbed her in the neck.
And when she says they, she includes the other Holbrook brother, Michael.
Well, I know Michael Holbrook was at least present because he put himself with his brother that evening. I can't, necessarily say what his actions were.
Adding to her belief, this surveillance video showing both Holbrook brothers, Russell and Michael, at a nearby Walmart taken shortly after the suspected time of the murder.
We believe, yes, it was after they had already killed Melissa Howard. They went in there to buy medicine for the child of Russell's girlfriend. And it's got Michael even looking at his hands in Walmart. Maybe he got blood on his hands, maybe he touched something, I don't know. He was looking at his hands. It's obvious that he's looking at what he's doing. The fact that after all these years, we now know basically what happened to Melissa Howard and who done it. But we want to make the case stronger.
So before announcing they had a DNA match, the detectives had one more move to make.
Can you talk? Yeah, I got a few minutes.
They got a warrant to tap the phones of the two brothers, listening in as Russell admitted to Michael he had indeed gone to Melissa's house 2 days before the murder, something he had earlier denied to police.
I went to her house and talked to her. Went to Missy's house? Yeah. So you've been to her house before? Yes. So I mean, then it's possible that your DNA's in her house. Yeah, but it wouldn't have been all over hers. No, of course not. Let's get over there getting you a piece, but yeah, I wish.
And the detectives did what they call tickling the wire, purposely leaking information to the brothers and their friends.
Oh, man, it's like we said, they're trying to scare me. So now they're telling everybody in Okaloosa County that they have me dead to rights.
We told Michael that we had the results of DNA, and it looked like it was a match to his brother. So we wanted to see if that would initiate a phone call, which it did.
No, he says they got some new DNA technology. He showed me a paper saying they have your DNA in multiple places on her body, and that I have put myself with you. But right. He showed me, he had a paper about it. You're 1 in 39 million. Your DNA was all over her body. Yada, yada, yada. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, it don't make sense. And that's what I told him. It didn't make sense to me either.
And Michael seemed upset the detectives thought he was part of the crime.
And I kept saying, well, what all this got to do with me? And he just kept saying, well, you know, we got you on video with him at Walmart, so you was there too. And like last time they came, they said they reenacted the crime scene and all that shit, and it had to have been 2 people. And he told me, he said, you know, we just wanted to give you this one last chance, you know, to give a statement. And I was like, well, look, man, you done called me a liar last time. I said, I've done give you 3 fucking recorded statements. You tell me I'm lying, so you want me to give you a 4th one, and you're just gonna tell me I'm lying again. And Michael even talked about if he gets arrested, all he's got to say is he didn't know what was going on in the house. You know, he's almost creating his own defense. And I was just saying I was with you to protect you from your wife.
Well, they're trying to say you and I planned it, right? Premeditated. So then they get you as principal and get me as capital.
They had what they needed to bring charges against Russell Holbrook.
A Florida grand jury has returned an indictment in a murder case involving a local woman, Melissa Howard, that had gone unsolved for almost 13 years. David Russell Holbrook Jr. was arrested in Alabama and returned today to Florida to stand trial on charges for first-degree murder.
It was a great feeling to be able to bring him in to answer for what he's done.
And now, the detectives were hoping that Russell Holbrook would try to cut a deal and implicate his brother Michael and Melissa's ex-husband, Brian Howard.
Our theory of the case is that Brian Howard solicited the Holbrook boys to kill Melissa Howard. I didn't feel Russell would go down for the whole thing. I figured he'd end up talking on the rest of them.
People that do stuff out of the goodness of the heart don't kill people. I mean, either you're giving me money, you're giving me something. I'm not just doing it out of the goodness of my heart.
And when he was being questioned at the time of the murder, Brian Howard even brought up a possible twisted good old boy deal he had made with Russell.
And he makes a statement to us that, yeah, the rumor was made that I was supposed to kill Russell's wife and Russell was supposed to kill my wife. He brought that up. We never made that comment. So it makes you wonder if that really was the plan.
But if that was the plan, Russell Holbrook was holding up his end of the deal, turning down any offer for a plea, refusing to implicate others, and ready to go to trial.
Arrogant is the word I was thinking. He was non-touchable.
All rise, please. Circuit Court is now in session.
May it please the court and defense counsel.
It took 13 years to get to this day. Russell Holbrook on trial in an Okaloosa County, Florida courtroom for the murder of Melissa Howard.
I think they thought they had the perfect plan. I think they thought they had the perfect execution. And I don't think he ever thought he'd be where he is right now today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Prosecutor Clifton Drake began with a recap of the men who were in Melissa Howard's life at the time. The man accused of killing her, Russell Holbrook, his brother Michael Holbrook, her ex-husband Brian Howard, and the boyfriend who discovered her body, a UPS driver named Christopher Cadenhead.
You will also learn that he was married at the time that he was dating Melissa Howard. He will admit that to you. That is no secret that he was having an affair with Melissa Howard.
And the prosecutor then told the jury that it was only thanks to new DNA testing techniques used on Melissa's sweatshirt that the lab analysts were able to determine that one of those 4 men had been a DNA match.
And you will hear testimony from Jennifer Hatler that when she compared Russell Holbrook's DNA to the male DNA on Melissa Howard's sweatshirt, it matched. You will hear her testify that the frequency of occurrence of those two being a match is 1 in 39 million people.
And then an admission from the prosecutor that would later give the defense an opening.
You will also learn, during my case, maybe during the defense, that a DNA contamination occurred in this case.
Contamination of DNA test results has proven to be one of the few effective ways for defense lawyers to undercut the presumed certainty of a DNA match.
Good morning, everyone.
And Holbrook's lawyer, John Jarvis, would make it a key part of his case.
The contamination occurred on the most important piece of evidence in this trial. So it's not quite as clear and dried as the state would have you to believe. The next thing is motive. For 13 years, Crestview Police, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, investigators from the state attorney's office were all unable to produce a motive for Russell to commit this crime. 13 years, couldn't produce one. No motive, absolutely no motive. And I would ask that after the close of all this evidence, that you come back with a verdict and return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you very much.
Is the state ready to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Carrie Winkler.
Melissa Howard's daughter, 15 years old at the time when she came home to discover her mother's body.
So what happened once the door was opened? It's okay, ma'am. Take your time.
Once we were able to open the door, I went into the front foyer and I turned the light on.
What did you see once there was better light?
My mom lying there.
And then she described how frightened her mother was of Russell Holbrook, who she said she had seen talking to her mother just 2 days before the murder.
Was there any other time that Russell was at your house other than that Wednesday night?
No.
Why not?
Russell was not allowed out of our house. He was considered one of Brian Howard's friends, and my mother was going through a custody battle with Brian Howard. He had made several threats on her life. She considered Russell to be his friend and dangerous. She said that she had caught him at her house before with a gas can, and I was to never let him nor any of Brian's friends at our home, inside the home, ever.
No further questions. Thank you.
Now, the jury was about to hear the intimate details of Melissa Howard's extramarital affair, as the prosecution needed to call her then-boyfriend, Chris Cadenhead.
How long had you been seeing Melissa Howard before she died?
Right at 3 months. Exactly 3 months, I believe.
He said he had come to her house around 11:15 that night.
What did you see when you went inside?
First, it took a minute for my eyes to adjust. And when my eyes did adjust, I could see Melissa lying on the floor.
Did anyone call 911?
I did.
There's blood everywhere.
Is she breathing? Can you get a pulse of any kind?
I haven't even touched her, no ma'am. I didn't want to mess with nothing. She's been murdered.
On cross-examination, all Holbrook's lawyer wanted to talk about with Cadenhead was the affair and whether that might be a motive for murder.
And I guess Melissa Howard knew that you were married, is that
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And there was some talk that you were going to be leaving your wife, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir. I was pretty much heading out the door, yes, sir.
Okay. And you had kind of indicated to her, Miss Howard, Miss Melissa Howard, that you wanted to be with her, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, were you ever aware of any pregnancy tests being taken?
I was not.
But you were confronted by FDLE agents with the possibility that she was taking a pregnancy test, or they asked you about that, didn't they?
They asked me if I knew that there was one in the garbage can, and I had no idea.
And it turned out the 911 recording also caught Caden Hitt on a second phone calling his wife Sherry from the murder scene.
Oh my God. Sherry, come to rescue.
She didn't know what you were doing over at a dead woman's house either, did she?
She had no idea.
But so she finds out on this night that you're having an affair, and not only are you having an affair, but you're having an affair with this dead woman that you discover. Is that right?
Yes.
On day 2, prosecutors called Melissa's son Taylor, who had been raised by his father after his mother's murder.
You know, Taylor was 10 years old when his mother got killed. He was 20 when he finds out that maybe his dad had something to do with it.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Taylor Howard, Melissa Howard's son.
Taylor recalled his last hours with his mother.
We played some board games, and she wound up taking me to a dinner with my dad and his side of the family, and that was the last time I seen her.
The board game later found scattered on the floor in front of his mother's body.
When your mom dropped you off, can you just describe how that exchange went?
Very emotional. She was very upset. I knew something was off that night. My dad stayed in his vehicle, and they exchanged words across the parking lot. I didn't want to leave her. She was really upset.
He testified at the trial, and it was not favorable to his father, and I'm not sure that they have a relationship any longer. It breaks my heart because he should have been with his mom.
And Holbrook's lawyer used Taylor's testimony as a way to suggest that maybe his father, Brian Howard, had been the killer that night, and that his alibi was not so airtight.
The Azteca restaurant is actually very close in proximity to your mom's house, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Very close.
Yes, sir.
Now, you say when you got home that evening, do you know when you got home?
I don't recall.
Don't recall the exact time?
Yes, sir.
But you just recall that your dad went upstairs?
Yes, sir.
And nobody saw him after that?
Yes, sir.
That's all the questions I have.
My name is Janice Burke, B-U-R-K-E.
And Ms. Burke, what do you do for a living?
I am a family law attorney.
I was nervous and scared, but I knew I had to be strong for Melissa because she had asked me.
Janice Burke was the lawyer Melissa Howard called after the threatening visit from Russell Holbrook 2 days before the murder.
The first thing that she said was, I knew this was going to happen.
Did she elaborate on what that was?
Well, after I asked her and said, you knew what was going to happen.
What did
she
say?
said, I knew Brian was going to send one of his men over to scare me.
Did she say who Brian Howard sent to scare her?
She said it was Russell.
To have to look at him and tell the court and tell the jury that that's who called her on that Wednesday night and that she was scared to death, it was difficult. It would have been easier for me not to do that, and especially with the way that he was looking at me. It would have been much easier not to do it, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to Melissa because she asked me to be there for her if something happened to her.
All that was left now for the prosecution was to present the DNA evidence from Melissa's sweatshirt and to explain why to the jurors the contamination in the state DNA lab did not matter.
Good morning and welcome to the Law and Crime Network. As the state nears the end of its case in the Russell Holbrook murder trial, the jury today will hear about the DNA evidence. Evidence the prosecution says links the defendant to the crime scene.
My name is Jennifer Hattler.
Ms. Hattler, where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the Biology and DNA section.
There was no more important testimony. Analyst Jennifer Hattler talking about the DNA of Russell Holbrook that she found on Melissa Howard's sweatshirt.
So this is the sweatshirt, and you can see it has quite a bit of blood on it, but this is the area that had the least amount of blood. And this is the cutting that I took, the additional cutting, and then this is the cutting. These stains from before.
All done years after the murder, thanks to the new DNA testing techniques.
That's 100% what put Russell there.
It's almost like magic at sometimes. It's hard to describe because DNA has opened up the door in so many things.
Now, Mrs. Hattler, we've talked about a contamination that occurred in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
The cross-examination of Hattler was all about possible contamination, how easily it can happen in a lab.
I believe you said sometimes you've gotten your DNA in samples before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've even gotten your baby's DNA in samples. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's touch DNA, right?
I was assuming from the baby that it was saliva or drool.
The baby touched you. Then you went to work and came into the lab. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the analyst said in the case of Melissa's sweatshirt, the contamination came from an unwashed pair of scissors.
I mean, I thought I had.
Did you clean the scissors or not before this contamination?
Well, obviously I did not.
But on redirect with the prosecutor, Hattler said once she realized the mistake, she used a second sample that was not contaminated.
Were you able to draw a conclusion?
The partial foreign DNA profile matched the DNA profile from David Russell Holbrook. The frequency of occurrence of the partial DNA profile for unrelated individuals is 1 in 39 million.
May it please the court, defense counsel, ladies and gentlemen. Melissa Howard is 5 feet 6 inches and weighed 115 pounds. You've had the opportunity to observe the defendant. He's much bigger. We know he's military trained and he likes knives. It would not take him long at all to subdue and kill Melissa Howard. He does not need hours upon hours to carry this out. He can go in, do it, and get out.
For the 4 detectives who had worked on this case at some point over the last 13 years, it was the culmination of so much work, so many hours put in to find the killer.
I think we just had that feeling it was solvable if we just put our minds together.
They were in the courtroom for the closing arguments to hear the defense claim they had done a sloppy job.
This case was personal, ladies and gentlemen. They were aggressive. They were in a hurry. And this led to mistakes being made in the lab and elsewhere, and to stretching the science that was involved in the case. There's a lot of sloppy work going on and mistakes are being made. With all of these problems, they equal one thing: reasonable doubt. I don't know who murdered Melissa Howard. I don't. I just know the state hasn't proven that Russell Holbrook did it.
All right, it's my understanding the jury's reached a verdict. Clerk will publish the verdict at this time. The defendant will rise.
We, the jury, find as follows as to the offense charged in the indictment. Guilty of first-degree premeditated murder as charged in the indictment. So say we all this 27th day of February 2019.
He really showed no emotions that I could see.
I believe that he thought he beat it up until the time the jury said he was guilty.
The court is prepared at this time to enter sentence consistent with the law of the state of Florida. The sentence is as follows. David Russell Holbrook will be sentenced to life in prison in the state of Florida Department of Corrections.
Even though the sentence had been set, Melissa Howard's daughter, Carrie, wanted to be heard, wanted Russell Holbrook to hear what she had to say.
We haven't been with our mother for 13 years while he gets to go free and be with his children and his grandchildren. And our mother missed all of our graduations, me becoming a nurse following in her footsteps. Her first grandchild born in December, my upcoming wedding in August, and everything else that a mother should never have to miss, let alone the children ever have to go through, because someone has such disregard for human life.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Defendant will be taken into custody instanter.
Well, I was happy, but it felt unfinished, and I want to know why. That's an easy question to answer. Why? There's no logical reason for Mr. Holbrook to go into Melissa's house and stab her multiple times and kill her. It doesn't add up that he did that.
I honestly believe that either Brian Howard put him up to it or somebody else was with him. He didn't do it by himself.
And 3 months after the verdict, detectives got a new lead.
So, Ms. Howard, what brings you here?
I'm scared that my husband's going to kill me.
Okay, and your husband is?
Brian Howard.
Brian Howard's frightened wife, Jordan Victoria Howard, showed up at the sheriff's office, and FDLE agent Megan Palumbo was brought in to help lead the questioning.
We know what happened in 2006, so we don't want that to happen to you, okay? And we can't undo that, but we can try to fix this.
So you're just afraid?
I know that he killed Melissa. I know that he did that. I know that he'll do that.
Whoa, how do you know that?
Because I know.
What? All right, you're making a comment. How do you know?
Because he told me.
Claiming her husband had arranged for someone else to do it.
He didn't tell me that Russell's the one that actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
He said some other name, I'm sure, just to cover Russell.
Okay.
But he told me that he hired someone to do it.
Brian Howard was later arrested and convicted of a misdemeanor charge of domestic abuse. He has denied any involvement in the murder of his former wife, Melissa, and he has not been charged with any crime in that case. Nor has Michael Holbrook been charged with any crime in the case, as his brother Russell spends the rest of his life behind bars for the murder of Melissa Howard.
There's still time. Russell hasn't been sitting there long enough in jail. Time takes its toll on a person. I think Russell's always been very protective of Michael, but Russell won't be protective of Brian. He doesn't owe Brian anything.
Her family and friends say they are still waiting for justice to be fully served for Melissa Howard.
I promised her I would always fight. And I promised that I'd never let it die, that I'd always fight for her. So I will.